Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 3 of our complete practice question series for the SC-100 Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 3. Question number 77. Scenario. An organization currently routes internet email through an external secure email gateway before delivery to Exchange Online. It will retire the gateway and use Exchange Online protection with Microsoft Defender for Office 365 as the only inbound inspection path. Which configuration determines that internet mail is delivered directly to Microsoft's protection service? The available options are as follows. Option A, Exchange Online accepted domains. Option B, public DNS/MX records. Option C, an Exchange Online mail flow rule. Option D, an inbound Exchange Online connector. The correct answer is option B, public DNS/MX records. Here's why. Internet senders use the domains MX records to select the inbound mail destination. Pointing the MX records directly to Exchange Online protection routes new inbound mail to Microsoft's filtering stack instead of the retired third-party gateway. Why are the other options not correct? A. Accepted domains define how Exchange Online treats recipient domains, but do not control the internet delivery route. C. A mail flow rule processes messages after Exchange Online receives them and cannot redirect external senders to Microsoft's Edge. D. An inbound connector defines trusted mail flow handling, but public senders still follow the MX destination. Exam tip. MX records determine the first inbound mail hop. Connectors and transport rules govern processing after routing reaches Exchange Online. Question number 81. Scenario. Remote administrators use Linux workstations to manage Linux virtual machines in an Azure virtual network. They must connect by SSH with Microsoft Entra authentication. The design must avoid public IP addresses on the virtual machines, and the supported connection method must not provide SSH file transfer from the Linux client. Which access service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, point-to-site VPN. Option B, just-in-time virtual machine access. Option C, Azure Bastion. Option D, Azure NAT Gateway. The correct answer is option C, Azure Bastion. Here's why. Azure Bastion provides SSH access to virtual machines through private IP addresses without assigning public IPs to the virtual machines. Linux native SSH clients can use Microsoft Entra authentication through Bastion, and that supported client-to-Linux VM combination does not provide file transfer. Why are the other options not correct? A. A point-to-site VPN provides network reachability, but does not itself enforce Microsoft Entra SSH authentication or prevent SSH file transfer. B. Just-in-time access temporarily opens management ports, but does not remove the public exposure model or control the SSH client's file transfer capability. D. Azure NAT Gateway provides outbound source network address translation and does not provide inbound administrative access. Exam tip. Azure Bastion centralizes private RDP and SSH access. Verify the exact client and target combination for Entra authentication and file transfer support. Question number 82. Scenario. A healthcare organization is retiring its data centers and moving to an Azure-only operating model. Several business applications cannot be modernized yet and still require LDAP, Kerberos, and domain join capabilities. The organization does not want to deploy or patch domain controllers in Azure. Which identity service should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Option B, Active Directory Domain Services on Azure Virtual Machines. Option C, Microsoft Entra Domain Services. Option D, Microsoft Entra External ID. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Entra Domain Services. Here's why. Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides managed domain capabilities such as LDAP, Secure LDAP, Kerberos, NTLM, and domain join without requiring the organization to deploy, patch, or maintain domain controllers. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Entra ID provides cloud identity and modern authentication, but does not directly expose traditional domain services required by legacy LDAP and Kerberos applications. B. Self-managed ADDS domain controllers would support the applications, but would increase administrative and infrastructure maintenance effort. D. Microsoft Entra External ID manages customer and external identities and does not provide managed LDAP or domain services for legacy workloads. Exam tip. Use Microsoft Entra Domain Services when legacy domain protocols are required, but self-managed domain controllers should be avoided. Question number 83. Scenario. A software company uses service principals to automate access to applications and Azure resources. The security architecture must detect compromised credentials, anomalous sign-ins, and other risky behavior associated with these workload identities. The organization wants the lowest cost licensing combination that provides this protection. Complete the recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Detect workload identity risk by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Identity, Microsoft Entra ID Protection, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Statement 2. License the protected service principals with the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Entra ID P2, Microsoft Entra Workload ID Premium, or Microsoft Entra ID P1. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Entra ID Protection. Identity protection evaluates risky sign-ins and anomalous behavior for supported workload identities. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Entra Workload ID Premium. Workload ID Premium provides the required risk protection capabilities specifically for workload identities. Exam tip: protect service principals as workload identities and use Workload ID Premium when workload-specific risk protection is required. Question number 84. Scenario: a managed security provider uses Microsoft Defender XDR to operate security services for several customer tenants. Analysts in SecOps group must receive only the security operator role in each customer tenant. The provider wants to minimize repeated administration and ensure that the cross-tenant access architecture does not require creating external guest user accounts in the customer's directories. Which capability should the cybersecurity architect include in the design? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Intra B2B collaboration. Option B, granular delegated admin privileges, GDAP. Option C, Microsoft Intra privileged identity management. Option D, Azure Lighthouse. The correct answer is option B, granular delegated admin privileges, GDAP. Here's why. GDAP allows managed security service providers, MSSPs, to request least privilege, time-bound access to customer tenants. It allows the MSSP to map customer Microsoft Intra roles, such as security operator, directly to security groups in the partner tenant, entirely eliminating the need to create guest accounts in the customer directories. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Intra B2B collaboration requires creating a guest user object in the customer's directory for every analyst, which violates the requirement to avoid external guest accounts. C. Privileged identity management, PIM, governs the activation of roles for identities that already exist within a tenant. It does not natively establish the cross-tenant access without guest accounts. D. Azure Lighthouse provides cross-tenant delegation for Azure Resource Manager, ARM, workloads, not the Microsoft Intra directory roles required to manage Microsoft Defender XDR. Exam tip: use GDAP for partner/MSSP delegation of Microsoft 365 and Intra ID roles without guest accounts. Use Azure Lighthouse to delegate cross-tenant management of Azure resources and Microsoft Sentinel. Question number 85. Scenario: a financial institution is migrating a sensitive SQL Server database to Azure. Confidential columns must remain protected from database administrators and from malware operating with elevated privileges. Applications must perform rich server-side comparisons, including pattern matching, against encrypted values. The confidential computing design must use hardware-backed enclaves and Microsoft Azure attestation. Which database architecture should the security architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure SQL database with virtualization-based security enclaves. Option B, Azure SQL managed instance with always encrypted but without secure enclaves. Option C, Azure SQL database with Intel Software Guard extensions enclaves. Option D, SQL Server on Azure virtual machines with virtualization-based security enclaves. The correct answer is option C, Azure SQL database with Intel Software Guard extensions enclaves. Here's why. Always encrypted with Intel SGX secure enclaves in Azure SQL database uses hardware-backed confidential computing and supports Microsoft Azure attestation. Secure enclaves enable richer server-side operations, including pattern matching, while protecting plaintext and encryption keys from database administrators and high-privilege processes outside the enclave. Why are the other options not correct? A. Virtualization-based security enclaves in Azure SQL database provide enclave isolation but do not use the specified Intel SGX hardware attestation architecture. B. Always encrypted without secure enclaves does not support the same range of rich server-side operations over encrypted data. D. SQL Server on Azure virtual machines with VBS enclaves does not satisfy the stated Intel SGX and Azure attestation combination. Exam tip: when Azure attestation and hardware-backed SGX isolation are explicit requirements, select Azure SQL database with Intel SGX secure enclaves. Question number 86. Scenario: A company synchronizes identities from an ADDS forest to Microsoft Entra ID and uses pass-through authentication, PDA. The identity team is validating its hybrid account lockout architecture so that Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout stops cloud-based password guessing attacks without causing avoidable lockouts in the on-premises directory. Identify the identity systems whose settings must be evaluated for each lockout characteristic. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. When validating the failed attempt thresholds for the hybrid design, evaluate the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Entra ID only, ADDS, and Microsoft Entra ID, or ADDS only. Statement 2. When validating the lockout duration values for the hybrid design, evaluate the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are ADDS only, ADDS, and Microsoft Entra ID, or Microsoft Entra ID only. For Statement 1, the correct selection is ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID. The architect must verify that the Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout threshold is lower than the ADDS threshold to prevent on-premises lockouts. For Statement 2, the correct selection is ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID. The relative cloud and on-premises lockout durations affect recovery behavior and protection against repeated attempts. Exam tip. For hybrid smart lockout with pass-through authentication, the cloud lockout threshold must always be lower than the on-premises ADDS lockout threshold. Question number 87. Scenario. A multinational organization operates Microsoft Sentinel workspaces in two independently governed Microsoft Entra tenants. Analysts from a central tenant must manage the subscriptions containing those workspaces without changing directory context. The analysts also need a unified operational view across both workspaces. Complete the cross-tenant security operations design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Delegate management of the customer subscriptions by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Azure Blueprints, Azure Lighthouse, or Azure Sphere. Statement 2. In the Microsoft Sentinel multiple workspace view, the analyst can centrally manage the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are workbooks, incidents, or analytics rules. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Azure Lighthouse. Azure Lighthouse provides scalable cross-tenant Azure resource delegation. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Incidents. The incident view supports cross-workspace incident investigation and management. Exam tip. Use Azure Lighthouse for cross-tenant Sentinel operations and the multiple workspace incident view for centralized incident handling. Question number 88. Scenario. An online marketplace runs a public web application on an Azure Virtual Machine Scale set. The architecture must block inbound HTTP requests that match the OWASP core rule set. It must also inspect outbound web traffic and deny connections to destinations identified as malicious by Microsoft Threat Intelligence. Select the appropriate control for each traffic direction. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Protect the application from inbound OWASP-based attacks by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Network Security Groups, Azure Web Application Firewall, Azure Firewall, or Application Security Groups. Statement 2. Filter malicious outbound HTTP and HTTPS connections by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Azure Web Application Firewall, Network Security Groups, Azure Firewall, or Microsoft Entra Application Proxy. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Azure Web Application Firewall. WAF provides application layer protection against common web exploits represented in the OWASP rule sets. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure Firewall. Azure Firewall provides centralized egress filtering and threat intelligence-based deny capabilities. Exam tip. Use WAF for inbound web application attacks and Azure Firewall for centralized outbound threat intelligence filtering. Question number 89. Scenario. An enterprise is deploying Microsoft Entra Global Secure Access, GSA. The security team is configuring a conditional access policy that requires a compliant network location. The architect must identify which types of access can evaluate and enforce this specific GSA signal. Which two capabilities are supported by the compliant network condition? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Data Plane Continuous Access Evaluation, CAE, for Microsoft 365 workloads such as Exchange Online. Option B, Authentication Plane Access for any third-party SaaS application integrated with Microsoft Entra ID. Option C, Network Trust for unmanaged endpoints located in a branch office that does not route traffic through a GSA remote network tunnel. Option D, Data Plane Session Enforcement for private web applications that bypass Microsoft Entra Private Access routing. The correct answers are Option A, Data Plane Continuous Access Evaluation, CE, for Microsoft 365 workloads such as Exchange Online, and Option B, Authentication Plane Access for any third-party SaaS application integrated with Microsoft Entra ID. Here's why. The compliant network condition in conditional access verifies that traffic is routed through your verified global secure access workspace. It supports the authentication plane for all Microsoft Entra ID integrated applications, including third-party SaaS, and the data plane for applications that support continuous access evaluation, CAE, such as Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. Why are the other options not correct? C. A physical location does not make a network compliant. Traffic must be acquired by GSA. A branch office without a configured GSA remote network tunnel or GSA clients cannot satisfy the compliant network condition. D. For data plane enforcement to apply to private resources, the traffic must be routed through Microsoft Entra Private Access. Bypassing it nullifies the compliant network signal. Exam tip. A compliant network is not just a trusted IP range. It requires traffic to actively route through global secure access. It enforces the authentication plane for all Entra apps and the data plane for C-enabled apps. Question number 90. Scenario. A bank deploys Windows 11 endpoints that initially conform to Center for Internet Security benchmarks. The endpoints are managed through Microsoft Intune and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Security administrators need continuous assessment that identifies devices whose configuration has drifted away from the benchmark. Which Microsoft Defender vulnerability management capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Attack Surface Reduction Rules. Option B, Security Baseline Assessments. Option C, Microsoft Secure Score for devices. Option D, Authenticated Scans for Windows. The correct answer is Option B, Security Baseline Assessments. Here's why. Security baseline assessments in Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management compare endpoint configurations with established baselines, such as CS benchmarks, and identify devices that have drifted from the required configuration. Why are the other options not correct? A. Attack surface reduction rules prevent specific malicious behaviors, but do not assess overall compliance with a CS benchmark. C. Secure Score for devices summarizes security posture and recommendations, but is not the dedicated baseline comparison capability. D. Authenticated scans discover vulnerabilities and missing updates on unmanaged or network-accessible devices. They do not provide the required continuous benchmark drift assessment for managed endpoints. Exam tip. Use security baseline assessments when devices must be continuously compared with CAS or other prescribed configuration standards. Question number 91. Scenario. A manufacturing company has 5 private applications hosted on separate Windows servers. The same synchronized ADDS group requires access to every application, and the same conditional access controls will apply to all connections. Microsoft Entra Private Access must be highly available while minimizing configuration objects. Select the minimum application and connector configuration. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Publish the 5 application segments by creating the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are 5 enterprise applications, 1 quick access app, 5 quick access apps, or 1 enterprise application. Statement 2. Provide high availability by deploying at least the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are 10 private network connectors, 1 private network connector, 5 private network connectors, or 2 private network connectors. For statement 1, the correct selection is one quick access app. One quick access app can represent multiple private resources that share access requirements. For statement 2, the correct selection is two private network connectors. Two connectors prevent one connector failure from interrupting access. Exam tip: use quick access to group private resources with common access requirements and deploy multiple connectors for resilience. Question number 92. Scenario: an isolated application server hosts a private line of business application and has no direct internet access. A second Windows server can communicate with both the application server and Microsoft Cloud Services. Remote employees must authenticate with Microsoft Entra credentials before receiving access through Microsoft Entra Private Access. Complete the deployment design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. In the Microsoft Entra tenant, create the blank to represent the private application. The choices for Statement 1 are an access package, an enterprise application, a managed identity, or an app registration. Statement 2. On the intermediary Windows server, install the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Entra Connect, the Azure Connected Machine Agent, or a Microsoft Entra Private Network Connector. For Statement 1, the correct selection is an enterprise application. The enterprise application is the identity and policy object used for user authentication and access control. For Statement 2, the correct selection is a Microsoft Entra Private Network Connector. The connector forwards authenticated traffic to the isolated application through outbound connections. Exam tip: a private application requires an Entra enterprise application for access policy and a private network connector for private connectivity. Question number 93. Scenario: a development platform will host multiple microservices on Azure Kubernetes Service. The architecture requires a managed abstraction for retrieving secrets, encrypting service-to-service traffic automatically with mutual TLS, and reducing the amount of service mesh administration performed by application teams. Which technology should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Istio. Option B, Dapper. Option C, Flux. Option D, Envoy. The correct answer is option B, Dapper. Here's why. Dapper provides application building blocks for secret retrieval and secure service invocation. Its service-to-service communication uses automatic mutual TLS, and the managed AKS extension reduces the effort required to operate the supporting components. Why are the other options not correct? A. Istio provides a comprehensive service mesh and MTLS, but does not directly provide the same application-level secrets building block and generally requires more service mesh administration. C. Flux provides GitOps-based cluster and application configuration reconciliation, not secrets abstraction and automatic service invocation with MTLS. D. Envoy is a data plane proxy that can participate in an MTLS architecture but does not independently provide the complete managed secrets and application building block solution. Exam tip: choose Dapper when applications need managed building blocks, such as secrets and secure service invocation with automatic MTLS. Question number 94. Scenario: a research organization stores critical data sets in Azure file shares to meet strict regulatory compliance for write once, read many, worm, storage. The backup architecture must ensure that protected recovery points cannot be modified or deleted before their retention period expires. The protection must be made entirely irreversible so that absolutely no user, including a highly privileged administrator, can disable the setting. Select the 3 required actions to configure this protection and map them to the order in which they must be completed. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Lock immutability for the vault. Source item 2. Create a recovery services vault. Source item 3. Create an Azure backup vault. Source item 4. Enable vault immutability. Source item 5. Apply a resource lock to the workload resource group. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. First action. Destination B. Second action. Destination C. Third action. The correct mapping is create a recovery services vault, enable vault immutability, and then lock vault immutability. Here's why. Azure Files backups are protected in a recovery services vault. To enforce worm protection, vault immutability must first be enabled. Finally, locking the immutability setting makes the state permanently irreversible, ensuring that no administrator can disable the protection or delete recovery points before their retention expires. Exam tip: an Azure resource lock prevents the deletion of the vault resource itself, but does not prevent an administrator from deleting the recovery points inside the vault. Vault immutability is required to protect the data inside the vault. Question number 95. Scenario: an organization is deploying universal tenant restrictions through Microsoft Global Secure Access. The design must prevent users on the corporate network from signing in to unauthorized external tenants and must also enforce supported data plane protections for authenticated application traffic. Complete the scope assessment for universal tenant restrictions. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Authentication plane tenant restrictions apply to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are all Microsoft 365 applications, all Microsoft Intra-ID integrated applications, including third-party applications, or Microsoft SharePoint Online and Exchange Online only. Statement 2. The currently supported data plane enforcement scope is the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are all Microsoft Intra-ID integrated applications, Microsoft Graph only, or all Microsoft 365 applications. For Statement 1, the correct selection is all Microsoft Intra-ID integrated applications, including third-party applications. Microsoft Intra Authentication can enforce the tenant restriction for applications integrated with the identity platform. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Graph only. Current data plane universal tenant restriction enforcement is limited to supported Microsoft Graph traffic. Exam tip: distinguish authentication plane coverage from data plane enforcement. They can have different application and protocol scopes. Question number 96. Scenario: a digital services company continuously deploys internet-facing Azure App Service applications. New applications are automatically added to the company's public DNS namespace and are protected by an application gateway. The security team must detect hostile vulnerability scanning activity against running applications and discover externally visible weaknesses in newly published assets. Select the appropriate capability for each requirement. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Detect vulnerability scanner activity against a running app service application by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, Microsoft Defender for App Service, Azure Web Application Firewall, or Microsoft Defender External Attack Surface Management. Statement 2. Discover whether newly exposed internet-facing applications have exploitable weaknesses by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Azure Web Application Firewall, Microsoft Defender External Attack Surface Management, Microsoft Defender for App Service, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for App Service. The workload protection plan detects suspicious requests and attack activity targeting app service applications. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender External Attack Surface Management. Defender ESM discovers public assets and evaluates their externally observable exposures. Exam tip: use workload protection to detect attacks against known applications and ESM to discover and assess the organization's external attack surface. Question number 97. Scenario: a media company wants integrated protection for Microsoft 365. The security team must detect anomalous mass downloads from SharePoint Online that may indicate data exfiltration. It must also remove malicious Microsoft Teams messages automatically through zero-hour auto-purge. Select the Microsoft Security Service for each requirement. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Identify anomalous SharePoint Online download behavior by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Identity, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, or Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Statement 2. Apply zero-hour auto-purge to malicious Teams messages by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, or Microsoft Defender for Identity? For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Cloud Apps applies behavioral analytics and anomaly detection to cloud application activity. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Defender for Office 365 can identify and remove malicious collaboration messages after delivery. Exam tip: use Defender for Cloud Apps for SaaS behavior analytics and Defender for Office 365 for email and collaboration threat protection. Question number 98. Scenario: an organization protects its Azure-hosted Windows Server virtual machines using Microsoft Defender for servers. The security architecture must enforce a strict application allow listing model where unapproved executables, scripts, and installers are blocked from running on the servers. Which security capability should the cybersecurity architect recommend to enforce this execution restriction? The available options are as follows. Option A, App Control for Business Policies. Option B, Application Discovery Policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option C, Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access App Control. Option D, Vulnerability Assessment in Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management. The correct answer is Option A, App Control for Business Policies. Here's why. App Control for Business, formerly Windows Defender Application Control, is the current Microsoft recommended architectural standard for enforcing application allow listing on Windows and Windows Server. It prevents unauthorized executables, scripts, and drivers from running on the operating system. Why are the other options not correct? B. Defender for Cloud Apps Discovery Policies monitor and govern the usage of SaaS and cloud applications by users. They do not restrict local code execution on Windows servers. C. Conditional Access App Control routes SaaS application sessions through a reverse proxy for real-time monitoring. It does not perform operating system-level executable blocking. D. Defender Vulnerability Management identifies unpatched and vulnerable software, but does not enforce an executable allow list to prevent arbitrary code execution. Exam tip: adaptive application controls in Defender for Cloud have been retired. For Windows application allow listing and execution enforcement, recommend App Control for Business. Question number 99. Scenario: a company uses Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online, and Exchange Online. Compliance analysts need a consolidated interface where they can inspect items that match sensitive information types and review the locations in which those items were discovered. Which Microsoft Purview capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, eDiscovery. Option B, Content Explorer. Option C, Data Loss Prevention. Option D, Data Lifecycle Management. The correct answer is Option B, Content Explorer. Here's why. Microsoft Purview Content Explorer shows items that contain sensitive information types or have classifications and labels, allowing analysts to inspect affected content across supported Microsoft 365 locations. Why are the other options not correct? A. eDiscovery preserves, searches, reviews, and exports content for investigations and legal matters rather than serving as the primary sensitive content inventory. C. DLP applies policies and protective actions to sensitive data, but is not the interface designed to browse and inspect classified items. D. Data Lifecycle Management controls retention and deletion rather than discovering documents based on sensitive information types. Exam tip: use Content Explorer to inspect classified content and Activity Explorer to review how users and services interact with that content. Question number 100. Scenario: a data analytics platform stores information in multiple Azure Data Lake storage accounts. Service-side encryption must use customer-managed keys, and different data objects must be assignable to different encryption scopes at the finest supported level. At which storage level can the most granular encryption scope be applied? The available options are as follows. Option A, folder. Option B, storage account. Option C, file. Option D, container. The correct answer is option C, file. Here's why. Azure Storage encryption scopes can be assigned to an individual blob or file, providing more granular customer-managed key selection than applying one scope to an entire container or storage account. Why are the other options not correct? A. A folder is a hierarchical namespace construct and is not the most granular encryption scope assignment level. B. Account-level encryption applies broadly to the storage account and therefore provides the least granularity among the listed choices. D. A default encryption scope can be assigned to a container, but individual files can be assigned encryption scopes more granularly. Exam tip. Use encryption scopes when different containers or individual data objects require different customer-managed keys. Question number 101. Scenario. An organization receives files from external partners through Azure Blob Storage. Every uploaded object must be inspected after ingestion so that malicious files can be detected before downstream applications process them. Which security capability should the architect include? The available options are as follows. Option A, vulnerability assessment in Microsoft Defender for containers. Option B, sensitive data threat detection in Microsoft Defender for storage. Option C, malware scanning in Microsoft Defender for storage. Option D, runtime threat protection in Microsoft Defender for containers. The correct answer is option C, malware scanning in Microsoft Defender for storage. Here's why. Malware scanning in Defender for storage analyzes supported blobs after they are uploaded and produces scan results that downstream workflows can use to quarantine, block, or otherwise handle malicious files. Why are the other options not correct? A. Container vulnerability assessment evaluates container images and is unrelated to files uploaded to Azure Blob Storage. B. Sensitive data threat detection adds data sensitivity context to storage alerts, but does not perform malware scanning of each uploaded file. D. Defender for containers runtime protection monitors containerized workloads and does not scan files arriving in blob containers. Exam tip. Use Defender for storage malware scanning for uploaded blob content and combine the scan result with an automated quarantine or processing workflow. Question number 102. Scenario. A software company deploys Azure App Service workloads through Azure DevOps pipelines. After deployment, the security team must continuously evaluate the Azure resources against Microsoft Cloud Security benchmark recommendations and identify configuration drift. Which governance capability should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for App Service. Option B, Azure DevOps branch policies. Option C, Azure policy. Option D, DevOps security in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The correct answer is option C, Azure policy. Here's why. Azure policy continuously evaluates deployed Azure resources against assigned definitions and initiatives. Microsoft Cloud Security benchmark controls are mapped to Azure policy definitions, enabling ongoing compliance monitoring and identification of configuration drift. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Defender for App Service provides workload threat protection, but is not the primary configuration compliance enforcement and assessment mechanism. B. Branch policies govern changes to an Azure repos branch and do not continuously evaluate deployed Azure resources. D. DevOps security connects source code and pipeline environments to Defender for Cloud, but Azure policy evaluates the resulting Azure resource configuration after deployment. Exam tip. Use pipeline controls to protect code changes and Azure policy to continuously govern deployed Azure resources. Question number 103. Scenario. A company has two corporate locations named Campus A and Campus B. Microsoft Intra-Internet Access is used to forward Microsoft 365 traffic. The Microsoft traffic profile is assigned to all managed endpoints and to the remote network representing Campus A. Devices at Campus B have the Global Secure Access client installed. A linked conditional access policy applies to every user and permits Microsoft 365 access only from endpoints that meet the organization's compliance requirement. Complete the access evaluation for the two campuses. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Users working from compliant devices can access Microsoft 365 from the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Campus B only, Campus A, and Campus B, or Campus A only. Statement 2. Users working from non-compliant devices are blocked from Microsoft 365 at the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Campus A only, Campus A, and Campus B, or Campus B only. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Campus A and Campus B. Both campuses have a configured Global Secure Access Traffic Acquisition path. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Campus A and Campus B. The conditional access requirement applies to all users whose Microsoft 365 traffic is acquired from either campus. Exam tip. A global secure access policy can cover branch traffic through remote networks and endpoint traffic through the client. Question number 104. Scenario. An organization stores regulated data in Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. Customer-managed keys must be used at the finest granularity supported by each storage service. Select the most granular supported level for each workload. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. For blob storage, apply the encryption scope to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are an individual blob, a container, or the storage account. Statement 2. For Azure Files, configure the customer-managed key at the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are an individual file, the storage account, or a file share. For Statement 1, the correct selection is an individual blob. An individual blob is the finest supported blob storage encryption scope assignment. For Statement 2, the correct selection is the storage account. Azure Files uses the customer-managed key configured for its storage account. Exam tip. Blob encryption scopes support object-level granularity, while Azure Files customer-managed encryption is configured at the account level. Question number 105. Scenario. A data platform will use an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool and a serverless SQL pool. The organization requires an additional layer of encryption at rest and wants customer-controlled keys wherever the pool architecture supports them. Complete the encryption design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Protect the dedicated SQL pool by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are transparent data encryption with Microsoft Managed Keys, transparent data encryption with customer managed keys, or Azure Storage Infrastructure encryption with Microsoft Managed Keys. Statement 2. Protect the data queried by the serverless SQL pool by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are transparent data encryption with customer managed keys, Azure Storage Infrastructure encryption with Microsoft Managed Keys, or transparent data encryption with Microsoft Managed Keys. For Statement 1, the correct selection is transparent data encryption with customer-managed keys. The dedicated pool supports customer-managed TD protectors. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure Storage Infrastructure encryption with Microsoft Managed Keys. Serverless pool data resides in Azure Storage, and infrastructure encryption supplies the additional encryption layer. Exam tip. Apply database TD to dedicated pools and secure serverless data through the underlying Azure storage architecture. Question number 106. Scenario. A retailer will host public web AP is on Azure Kubernetes service. The ingress architecture must route HTTP and HTTPS requests to Kubernetes services and protect the applications against common web exploits by using web application firewall policies. Which Azure service should the architect use for the ingress solution? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Firewall. Option B, Azure Application Gateway. Option C, Azure Load Balancer. Option D, Azure Front Door. The correct answer is Option B, Azure Application Gateway. Here's why. Azure Application Gateway can provide Layer 7 ingress for AKS through the Application Gateway Ingress integration and can apply web application firewall policies to protect hosted HTTP and HTTPS services. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Firewall provides centralized network and application-aware filtering, but is not an AKS HTTP ingress controller. C. Azure Load Balancer provides Layer 4 load balancing and does not provide web application firewall inspection. D. Azure Front Door can protect and accelerate public web applications globally, but is not the Azure service used as the AKS cluster ingress controller in this design. Exam tip. Use Application Gateway with WAF when AKS requires Azure Native Layer 7 ingress and web attack protection. Question number 107. Scenario. A research organization will store confidential datasets in Azure storage. Security labels will be represented as tags on individual data objects. Authorization decisions must evaluate those tags when a user requests access. Complete the storage authorization design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Enforce tag-aware authorization by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are a shared access signature, attribute-based access control, or an access control list. Statement 2. Store the tag data as the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Azure Files Data, Azure Table Data, or Azure Blob Data. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Attribute-Based Access Control. ABAC conditions can evaluate resource attributes when authorizing a data operation. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure Blob Data. Blob index tags can be evaluated by supported Azure Storage ABAC conditions. Exam tip. Use Azure RBAC for role assignment, and ABAC conditions when access must also depend on blob attributes or tags. Question number 108. Scenario. An enterprise administers Azure virtual machines through Azure Bastion. Administrators must receive temporary access only from approved source locations. The architecture must separately control temporary network exposure and just-in-time activation of the Azure RBAC permissions required to request access. Select the service for each control layer. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Implement temporary source IP and port access rules by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Statement 2. Implement just-in-time activation of the required Azure RBAC role by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Cloud Permissions Management, Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management, or Microsoft Purview Privileged Access Management. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud JITVM access controls the temporary network path to the virtual machine. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management. PIM provides approval-based and time-limited activation of Azure resource roles. Exam tip. Separate temporary network exposure from temporary authorization. Defender for Cloud controls the former, and PIM controls the latter. Question number 109. Scenario. An organization manages 2 Azure subscriptions in 2 distinct Microsoft intratenants. Sub 1, linked to Contoso.com, contains an Azure backup vault named Vault 1. Group 1 manages backups for Sub 1. Sub 2, linked to ContosoSecurity.com, is a highly secured subscription used exclusively to manage security resources. Group 2 manages security for Sub 1 and Sub 2. You perform the following actions. Configure multi-user authorization, MUA, for Vault 1 by using a resource guard deployed to Sub 2. Enable all available MUA controls for Vault 1. In Contoso.com, create a Privileged Identity Management, PIM, assignment named Assignment 1. Configure Assignment 1 to enable Group 1 to activate the contributor role for Vault 1. For each of the following statements, select Yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select No. Statement 1. To enable MUA for Vault 1, a resource guard must be deployed to Sub 1. Statement 2. A user in Group 2 must approve changes made by a user in Group 1 to the backup policies of Vault 1. Statement 3. A user in Group 1 that activates Assignment 1 can disable soft delete for the backups of Vault 1 without the approval of a user in Group 2. Statement 1. To enable MUA for Vault 1, a resource guard must be deployed to Sub 1. The answer is no. To provide true separation of duties, SOD, and protect against compromised tenant administrators. The resource guard used for multi-user authorization, MUA, must be deployed in a different subscription/tenant, sub 2, than the backup vault, sub 1. Statement 2. A user in Group 2 must approve changes made by a user in Group 1 to the backup policies of Vault 1. The answer is yes. Group 1 has contributor access to Vault 1, but critical operations, like changing backup policies, are protected by MUA. Group 2, which manages the resource guard in sub 2, must explicitly approve these critical operations. Statement 3. A user in Group 1 that activates Assignment 1 can disable soft delete for the backups of Vault 1 without the approval of a user in Group 2. The answer is no. Disabling soft delete is a destructive, critical operation that is heavily protected by MUA. Activating a PIM assignment to gain contributor access to Vault 1 does not bypass the MUA requirement. Group 2's approval via the resource guard is still required. Exam tip. Multi-user authorization, MUA, for Azure Backup requires a resource guard in a separate administrative boundary to prevent a single compromised administrator from executing destructive actions. Question number 110. Scenario. A regulated Azure environment contains Windows Server virtual machines protected by Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2. Administrators must request temporary RDP access through Azure, and each approved access window must be limited to 3 hours. The virtual machines must also receive recurring agentless vulnerability assessments. Complete the protection design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Control temporary RDP access by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are adaptive network hardening, just-in-time VM access, or Microsoft Intra Authentication for Azure virtual machines. Statement 2. Perform the agentless vulnerability assessments by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are the Integrated Qualys Vulnerability Scanner, Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, or the Rapid7 Vulnerability Scanner. For Statement 1, the correct selection is just-in-time VM access. JIT keeps RDP closed and creates a temporary rule for the approved request window. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management. Defender for Cloud Agentless Machine Scanning uses MDVM to identify vulnerabilities without deploying a scanner agent. Exam tip. Use JIT for temporary management port exposure and MDVM for current native vulnerability assessment in Defender for servers. Question number 111. Scenario. A hybrid organization operates Windows and Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers in its data centers and Windows Server Data Center, Azure Edition virtual machines in Azure. The update architecture must support hot patching for eligible Azure virtual machines, on-demand update assessment and deployment, and extended security updates for supported on-premises servers. Complete the hybrid update management architecture. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Centrally assess and deploy operating system updates by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are System Center Updates Publisher, Azure Update Manager, or Azure Automation Update Management. Statement 2. Connect the on-premises servers to Azure Management by installing the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are the Log Analytics Agent, the Azure Connected Machine Agent, or the Azure Monitor Agent. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Azure Update Manager. Update Manager is the current Azure service for update inventory and deployment across Azure and Arc-enabled servers. For Statement 2, the correct selection is the Azure Connected Machine Agent. The agent onboards non-Azure servers to Azure Arc, so Azure Management and ESU capabilities can be applied. Exam tip. Use Azure Update Manager for hybrid patch orchestration and Azure Arc for bringing non-Azure servers under Azure Management. Question number 112. Scenario. An organization must prevent employees on its managed network from authenticating to unauthorized Microsoft 365 tenants. The security team wants to enforce tenant restrictions without deploying and maintaining a separate web proxy infrastructure. Which Microsoft service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option B, Microsoft Intra Private Access. Option C, Microsoft Intra Internet Access. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Intra-Internet Access. Here's why. Microsoft Intra-Internet Access can apply universal tenant restrictions to Microsoft traffic and prevent users from authenticating to unauthorized external Microsoft Intra and Microsoft 365 tenants. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender for Cloud Apps governs cloud application usage and sessions, but is not the global secure access service that applies universal tenant restrictions to acquired network traffic. B. Microsoft Intra-Private Access provides identity-aware access to private applications. D. Defender for Endpoint protects endpoints and can contribute network signals, but it is not the tenant restriction enforcement service. Exam tip. Use intra-internet access for secure web gateway and tenant restriction scenarios involving public Microsoft and Internet services. You have completed part 3 of the SC-100 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.